Hello and welcome back. sleepywhatsit here with another miniatures video for you. In today's video, we're going to be doing a paint-along tutorial for the Orruk Gutrippaz, focusing on using just the supplies that you get with the new Orruk Gutrippa and paint set from GW. I'll be discussing in a later portion of the video some refinements that you can make to this paint scheme if you have the Stormcast Vindicator paint set or the paints and tool sets, but we're going to be primarily focusing on just what you get in the very basic kit here. This is a companion to my previous Stormcast and Vindicator paint-along. There's going to be a bunch of duplicated information at the beginning of this video for people that haven't seen the previous one and are new to painting. So if you don't need to or don't want to listen to all that preliminary stuff again, you should skip down to the next chapter. If you've not seen one of my paint-alongs before, welcome. I hope that you find them useful. I try to structure these around how I would teach someone in person during a painting session. So I try to break it down step by step, showing you what I'm doing and kind of explaining why I'm doing it. I'm targeting this at new painters, so I'm going to be trying to limit the number of techniques that I'm using and explain them when I use them, so we're not going to be doing any complex wet blending or anything crazy like that. I also give you pause points at various times to go complete the steps that I've just described. The markers for these look something like this. I'm not going to be doing an in-depth tutorial here on how to assemble and prep your minis. I've done a couple videos on how to assemble GW monopose minis previously that I'll link down below and throw a card up for now. The other thing we need to address before we start painting is that there is no primer or any other undercoat supplied in this kit. You can paint hard polystyrene like we have here directly using acrylic paints, but acrylic paints adhere to acrylic and primer better than they do to hard polystyrene. So you're going to have issues with the paint rubbing off while painting before it completely cures, and in general, without a primer, the paint job is going to tend to wear off after handling. The solution, as I've alluded to, is to prime your minis before we start, but we haven't been provided with one. I highly recommend you prime your minis. I do it for everything myself. I've created an entire video discussing the basics of priming your minis that you can go check out, and honestly, for these kits, I would recommend just going and paying the extra money to get some primer. For this model, since there are some people that may be painting using unprimed plastic, I've primed my mini, but I've done a mid-tone gray that's the same approximate color as the underlying plastic so that you can see things like how multiple layers of paint will look and things like that. So if you need to, you can pause the video now and go and assemble and prepare your model. Before we get into actual painting, let's discuss how to prepare your paint on your palette. For beginners, which I will fully concede as a young lad, I totally did this, there's a natural tendency to try and paint straight out of the pot, but you really should resist this tendency. This is because the consistency of most acrylic paints, and especially Citadel paints, is far too thick to get a smooth layer on your model straight out of the pot, though you'll get great coverage. As you can hopefully see here with this Abaddon Black, straight out of the pot, the paint tends to hold its shape quite significantly and isn't naturally leveling out. When you paint with paint that is this thick, it's going to be prone to leaving little ridges in the paint from the brush stroke, and even worse, you could fill in some of the details of your sculpt also. The fix to this is to thin your paint down by mixing in a little bit of water into your paint before you actually start painting, because acrylic paint is water soluble. You don't have to add too much water, just enough so the paint is naturally flattening on the palette. When you get to this consistency, it may look a touch streaky when you lay it down, which is totally fine. That just means you have to apply 2 thin coats to get complete coverage. But thin paint should dry faster than thick paint, so it shouldn't be adding too much more time, and you're going to avoid having like a really clumpy paint job. For starting out on our Orruk, we are going to be painting all the skin first, using our green paint, Orruk Flesh. All acrylics have a tendency to settle out over time in the pot, so remember before you crack open your paint to shake the ever-loving crap out of it to make sure all the pigment's mixed in together. We're going to be basing out the face, the torso, the arms, the legs using this color. Since this is the first color of paint we're putting down, you don't have to be too careful about overages and things like that, so you can just focus on getting complete coverage of the areas that are supposed to be green. If you've thinned your paint sufficiently, you'll probably need to apply a second layer of paint to clean up any thin sections where the gray is showing through a little bit. This is what my model looks like after the green is painted and dried, so you can see where I painted on my model. You can pause the video now and go paint the green areas of your model. The next area that we're going to be painting on the model is the shield of our little Orruk. This is going to be based out using Mephiston Red, my favorite paint to mispronounce. We're going to be going over all the details of the face later, so you can just kind of go a bit ham and paint everything red, mostly just trying to avoid hitting the already painted arm on the backside. This is what my model looks like after the shield is painted red. You can pause the video now and go paint the red area on your shield. With the skin and shield done, we're going to next move on to painting using our Steel Legion drab. We're going to want to paint the leather clothing on your model with this paint, as well as the haft of the spear since it's wood, those rope bindings on the limbs, and the teeth on the shield. If we had more browns or other colors to mix in, we could play with painting the patchwork leather different shades to give a feel made from different animals, or do the rope in like a beige to stand out, but c'est la vie, this is what we have. This is how my model looks after I've based out all the Steel Legion drab regions. You can go paint some brown on your model now. With those three colors done, we have the majority of the model based out with the exception of all those little dangly metal bits. These are going to be based out using our steel colored paint, Lead Belcher. So this is going to be things like the blade of the spear, any armor plates on your model, and any fine details like the butt of the spear, rivets on the shield, things like that. You can paint the shield eyes metallic if you want, that can be fun. Things like the handle and the back of the shield can be steel too if you're feeling a bit bold with your painting. There is one model that they have with a little Gork or Mork idol that I would paint using this steel color also, but the specific example I'm doing here doesn't have that. Once you have this metallic paint done, I would take some time to clean up the edges of your paint, fixing any spillages into other colors that you might have, since the next step we're going to be doing is shading our model, and fixing base coat issues after shading can be a bit of a pain. Here's my model with all the base coats applied. You can go paint the metallic regions of your model now and clean up your base coat. Now that we have all our paint colors laid down, it's time to shade our model to get some of the shadows darkened and pick out those details. We're going to be doing this by applying a wash of Agrax Earthshade to the entire model. Agrax Earthshade is a shade instead of a standard matte paint, so it's a little bit transparent and a little bit watery so it flows. This means they'll tend to seep down into the details and darken them, and kind of just generally slide off the high areas of the model. The process for applying this is to load up your brush, slop some paint on your model, and then use your brush to move the paint around to thin it out so it isn't getting too thick anywhere. You're going to want a thin coating of shade paint everywhere so that it flows down into any recesses. If you start to see pooling where it's getting really wet, you're going to want to, you can use your brush to pull the excess out and move it to other areas. If you're finding that there's an area where there's just too much shade on the model right now, like say on the shield or something, and you can't spread it out any further to fix this pooling, then just clean off your brush and then use the unloaded brush to wick away that excess paint. Since our shade here is so much wetter than our other paints, it's going to take a while to dry, like 15 or more minutes. I recommend going and having a cup of coffee, working on another model, or watching some of my videos while waiting for it to dry. This is what my model looks like after applying Agrax Earthshade and letting it dry. You can pause now and go shade your model. So now that we've based and shaded our model, we've reached what I would consider the minimum to meet a Tournament 3 color paint job. I'm not a huge fan of leaving models at this step because they look very unfinished to me, but if you're just wanting to get paint on your model and getting out and playing games, this would be sufficient. How we're going to improve the model and move it to a more complete state is by brightening/highlighting it. The shade that we applied did a really good job of darkening all the shadows for us and making those details clearer, but It does this at the cost of darkening the entirety of the model, as well as kind of making it look a little dirty. Admittedly, in the case of our swamp-dwelling Orruk here, being a bit grimy isn't the worst thing, but we still want to push up those bright points to increase the contrast on our model, so it reads a little bit better. More contrast makes details more clear and more complete. So we're going to be doing this by highlighting this by applying our original base paints in a controlled, targeted manner to where we already painted. Specifically, we're going to be focusing on brightening any raised details and the parts of the model, like the top of the head and such, that would be in direct sunlight if there was like the sun above it. To keep that nice darkening we got from the shade, we're going to avoid painting into the crevices and generally avoid highlighting the underside of our model. The first color that we're going to be highlighting with, of course, is our Orruk green, hitting all those visible flesh areas. I'd play special attention to areas like the hands, feet, and a face where there's a lot of fine details to make sure that you're only touching the raised elements, but still picking them out, but definitely avoid getting into the shadows. If you get into the shadows a little bit, just apply a little bit of Agaric Earth shade after the green dries to clean that up. Areas like the arms and shoulders don't need as much precision, though you should still highlight the tops of them. Also remember, in comparison to something like a shiny, polished Stormcast, we are wanting to preserve some of that dirtiness we get from our Agaric Earthshade. So when you're trying to choose, like on a large flat area, should I, like on the chest or back, should I put more or less on? I would lean towards less cleanup. Once I've completed highlighting the skin, the next area that I highlighted was the red of the shield using Festin Red. This mostly involves tracing out the rim of the shield, picking out any raised details like the nose, the cheeks, the lips, and things like that. These are big, kind of cartoony features, so they should be relatively easy to target. Also, this red can be used on the point of your brush to pick out the eyes of your model if you're feeling adventurous and want them to pop. After we have highlighted our shield, the next paint we're going to be highlighting is using our Steel Legion Drab. So we're going to be hitting all the high points, the leather and the wood, and the other areas that we did with this color before. I personally skipped highlighting the rope/leather wrappings on the limbs, just because I kind of want them to sink into the background a little bit. A lot of these elements that we're highlighting have sharp raised details on them, so instead of trying to use the point of the brush to kind of do a fine highlight down the edge of like some leather, you can instead use the side of the body of the brush, on the belly, I guess, and slide that down. I find it's easier to have much more control when highlighting edges like this, so you'll need to make sure that you have a light touch with this and that you're not hitting other elements. In addition, you could, the things like you can use this for like the teeth on the shield, to get the edges and things like that. You can also use a bit of this paint on the tip of your brush to pick out the teeth of your Orruk, again, if you're feeling adventurous in getting those fine details. The last color that we have to highlight is our Lead Belcher steel areas. This is going to be a lot of picking out metal studs on the shield and brightening up any armor bits, and just generally that edge highlighting along the spear blade to make it look nice and sharp. This is what my model looks like after I've done all the described highlighting to it. You can pause now and go do some highlighting on your model. With all that highlighting done, we've got the bulk of the figure completed at this point. To finish off the miniature and pull it all together, we're going to be applying some texture paste to the base, specifically our Sterling Mud. You're going to want to use some sort of firm spreading tool for this. My favorite is this metallic sculpting tool I have, but you can fashion something out of a straw or a popsicle stick in a pinch. GW does sell a texture tool that looks like it could get the job done relatively well. I don't own one, but yeah, it looks like it would be sufficient. I recommend against using a brush that you care about for this, since texture paint is very coarse, so it will damage bristles, and it's just generally going to get in the ferrule and just generally it ruins brushes. So you're going to want to apply a blob of this to the base away from your model to avoid getting any of it on your nice paint job you did, and then use your tool to push and spread it out across your base. Since we don't have a good stone color in this kit, I just hit that rock under the foot of my dude with the paste also. Yeah, it could, if I had a gray, I would have done a stone texture there. As this dries, the shapes become more defined, but you still want to try to avoid laying on too thick. Once you have it spread out, you can pat it with your tool to create ridges and such, make it less uniform so it doesn't just look like someone spread out some spackle on a base. After this is all applied, you can use your thumb or a wet piece of paper towel to remove any excess that gets on the rim of the outside of the rim of your base. If any of this does dry on, you can just either paint over it, or you can use a hobby knife to lightly scrape it off after if you need to. Depending on how humid/warm it is where you are, it can take as little as a half hour for this stuff to dry, upwards to a few hours. I normally personally just apply at the end of a painting session, and then the next day it will be dry and ready to go. You can pause now and apply the texture paste to your model. So we're in the final stretch here, just wanting to refine the look of our textured bases before calling it done. We're going to start by shading the texture paste using our Orruk's Earthshade so that we can get some variance in the color. Without this, you'll probably see that the Sterling Mud looks very flat looking. It's just, and you can't even pick out a lot of the textures visually. You're going to just want to shade it the same we did with the rest of the entire model. You can run a little bit up over the feet if you want to give them a slightly muddy look, integrate them into the texture a little bit, but that isn't really essential. And just like the shade before, it's going to take a bit of time to dry. So you should pause the video now and go shade your base. Since we do have a light brown in our kit in the form of Steel Legion Drab, we can highlight the texture of our base a little bit to finish it off. This can be done using a very basic dry brush. You're going to want to get a little bit of paint on your brush, wipe most of it off on a paper towel, and then stroke that. Basically, get enough off that if you were to lightly stroke it on the paper or the back of your thumb, the only paint is being deposited on the high areas, not into the recesses. And then you can gently stroke this back and forth across your base, catching the high points and ridges to make them stand out. You can also do a bit of dry brush onto the feet to make them a little bit dirtier, like they're actually walking in that terrain. Depending on how you like to finish your bases, the Steel Legion Drab color could be used to paint the rim. I personally am more of a dark black rim guy for my modern minis. You can pause now and go finish off your base of your model. And with the final step complete, this is what my model looks like. This is a perfectly good battle-ready paint job to me, and about as far as I would expect a beginner to be able to take it just using the contents of this kit. If you have access to the Stormcast Vindicator Plus paint set, or the Tools Plus paint set, there's a little bit more we can do to refine the model, but this is totally extra credit stuff at this point. If you have access to Corax White or another white, you can use that for basing out things like the stitching and the ropes as you were working, instead of Steel Legion Drab, so they're a little bit brighter. When you apply the Orruk's Earthshade to the white, especially if you put more than one coat, you can get a decent off-white beige, like worn leather look, so just to spice it up a little bit. If you have access to Rhinox Hide, which is a darker brown, you could consider trying painting some of the leather panels to differentiate them on, like, so that you have like your patchwork pied look going on, or you could use it instead for the wood on the haft of your spear to differentiate from the leather. Abandoned Black, which is quite common in a lot of kits, is a solid finishing color for the rim if you want to do black rims, which is my personal preference, and is also another option to choose for your wood paint, so it's more of like a dark black wood. Yeah, those are some of the immediate steps I can think of here if you're wanting to play around with refining this model a bit more. There's probably a lot more you can do with like mixing paints and things, but that's very much beyond like a very intro beginner's level. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this video informative and enjoyable. If you did, please give the video a like. If you want to see more content like this on painting miniatures and hobbying in general, please subscribe to the channel. If you're looking to support the channel in a more material way, I can accept money over on Ko-fi. And other than that, I look forward to seeing you in the next one.